Not all structures are what they appear to be. A doorway can be a symbol, a temple can be a machine, and a well, a simple well, can be a portal. We are taught to think of wells as practical things, as holes in the ground to draw water, as tools of survival, as stone rings to contain a resource. But the ancients did not build that way. They did not shape stone for function alone. They carved with intention. They aligned with stars. They listened to the land and built where it spoke. And when they dug into the earth, when they descended into the dark, they were not just searching for water, they were entering another world. Because wells, in their truest and most forgotten form, were gateways. Not metaphorical, not poetic, but real. To look into a well was to gaze into the unknown. To hear the echo of your own voice return from the depths changed was to speak to something more ancient than beach. The circle at the top was not just design, it was symbol, a mirror of the sun, a twin of the moon, a perfect boundary between this world and the one beneath. The stone walls were not random, they were aligned, built according to sacred proportions, Fibonacci spirals, golden ratios, and coded numbers. Some wells followed the geometry of wombs, others, the structure of stars. Depth was never arbitrary. Descent was part of the rite. Because the deeper you went, the more silence you met, and in that silence, something would awaken. You were no longer above ground, no longer in the world of names and rules and surface identity. You were beneath, within, beyond. In nearly every ancient civilization, the well appears not just as utility, but as mythic axis, the place where worlds touch. In Celtic lore, wells were entrances to the otherworld, guarded by goddesses, fed by unseen rivers that carried prophecy and song. In Mesopotamia, wells connected to the Abzu, the freshwater abyss beneath creation, home of gods, dragons, and hidden knowledge. In Greek thought, wells often marked sacred groves or oracular sites, not because of convenience, but because of resonance. Where water emerged, so did the divine. The act of lowering a bucket into a dark shaft, the sound of the rope creaking, the splash of water far below these were not just actions, they were ritual. Each movement, a meditation, each shadow, a test. Because the well was not just a hole, it was a challenge. It asked, how deep are you willing to go? What are you ready to release? Are you seeking water, or are you seeking truth? We forgot this. We covered them. We filled them. We built over them. But the earth remembers. The stone remembers. The silence beneath remembers. And somewhere inside you, you remember too. You've stood before a dark opening, felt the pull, heard the hum, wondered why your skin reacted before your mind understood. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Because the well was never just a well, it was an invitation to descend, to listen, to remember what waits beneath. Descent is not chaos. It only feels that way when you forget the pattern. Because every journey inward, every true initiation follows a structure, a hidden architecture, a sacred code. The ancients didn't build at random. They didn't carve stone merely to survive. They shaped reality according to geometry. Because geometry was the language of the divine. And nowhere is this more hidden and more profound than in the geometry of the well. The circle, the spiral, the vertical axis piercing the earth. These are not just shapes, they are symbols of passage. The circle is the boundary, the veil, the moment when one steps outside of linear time and enters the eternal. It is containment. It is womb. It is portal. To approach a well is to approach the edge of one world and prepare to be drawn into another, and then the spiral. Some wells were carved with winding stairs along the inner wall, slow, deliberate descent. This was not for aesthetics. The spiral is one of the oldest sacred symbols on Earth. It mirrors the path of energy, the turning of galaxies, the structure of DNA. It is movement inward toward origin and simultaneously movement outward toward transformation. In the spiral staircase, each step down is a layer peeled away, an old identity released, a shedding. Down, deeper, darker, until the mind no longer knows where it began. And finally, the shaft itself, the vertical line, a plumb line from surface to soul, a conduit between sky and stone. In sacred geometry, this is the world axis, the axis mundi, the line that connects heaven, earth, and the underworld. In myth, it is the tree, the mountain, the ladder, the spine. And here it is the well, straight, deep, precise. The ancients believed that when you aligned geometry correctly, you opened a resonance. Not symbolic, energetic. Stone remembers form. Water carries frequency. Silence amplifies intention. When a well was carved with sacred proportion, when the descent followed the path of symbol, it did more than provide water. It created a field, a space where the veil thinned, where the noise of the surface fell away, where the soul, stripped of names and stories, could finally listen. These were not places for the many. They were gates for the few. For the seeker, the dreamer, the one ready to step beyond the surface geometry of the world and enter the deeper symmetry of the soul. The well was not just dug, it was designed, not to impress, but to transform. And you carry that same geometry within you. The spiral of your breath, the circle of your mind, the vertical current of your spine. To descend is to realign, to walk the geometry of return. And the deeper you go, the clearer the pattern becomes. Beneath every myth is a memory, and beneath every memory a descent. Because the ancient world knew, to go deep is to be changed. The underworld was never just a place of death. It was a realm of truth, a mirror too honest for the surface, a library of all that is buried, not lost, but waiting. In every culture, this place had a name. In Sumer, it was Kur, the great dark land where the goddess Inanna descended, stripping herself at every gate. In Greece, it was Hades, not a hell, but a kingdom ruled by silence and shadow. In Norse myth, it was Hel, a half-lit realm beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. In Egypt, it was Duat, the hidden chamber of the soul's testing and remembering. This realm existed not to punish, but to purify. It was never evil, it was sacred. Because what lives beneath must eventually rise again, but only after it has shed what is false. And the well was one of the entrances. Dark, narrow, echoing the perfect threshold between the world of appearances and the world of essence. To descend into a well was to symbolically and sometimes literally walk into the arms of the underworld, to offer yourself to the depth, to meet the parts of you that sunlight cannot reach. It is here the masks fall away. Here the ego cannot follow. Here you face what you fear not as punishment, but as initiation. The ancients understood this. They carved wells not only as sources of water, but as architectural myth stories you could walk into. Stories where the spiral path downward led to silence, to stillness, to self. Because the underworld was not beneath you, it was within you. It was the grief you refused to feel, the memory you buried, the voice of the child before they were told who to be. And only by descending could you reclaim it. That's why the hero always goes down. Orpheus, Dante, Christ, Ishtar, they all walked into darkness to bring back what was lost. And so can you. The well is a map, not to the next place, but to the deep place, the one that holds your real name, the one that waits patiently beneath every version of you you've ever worn. To descend is not to fall, it is to return. To the forgotten depths, to the root of things, to the great dark womb that births all light. Because only what is willing to die can ever be reborn. Before words, there was vibration. Before prayer, there was tone. Before language climbed to the sky, it echoed from the belly of the earth. And in the ancient well, there was sound. Not silence, not emptiness, but resonance. To stand at the edge of a sacred well and speak is to feel your own voice return to you, deeper, slower, changed. Because the well doesn't just contain water, it contains frequency. A shaft carved into stone becomes a tuning chamber, a vertical vessel for vibration, a space where intention is magnified. The ancients didn't just dig wells for depth, they tuned them like flutes made of earth. In India, priests chanted into stepwells where the geometry caught and carried their voices. In Europe, pilgrims dropped coins into wishing wells not for luck, but to activate the space with sound and offering. In Mesoamerica, cenotes were not only entrances to the underworld, they were places where sound moved like spirit, echoing against the walls, drawing the attention of the unseen. Because when you speak into the deep, you are not speaking into emptiness. You are speaking into memory. And the well listens. It holds not just water, but the echo of centuries. Prayers, grief, songs, secrets, everything ever spoken into it still circles below. This is why initiates were often asked to chant, to hum, to whisper as they descended, not for performance, for attunement. To feel how sound changes in the dark is to feel how you change in the dark. To feel your voice absorbed by stone is to feel yourself dissolve into something vaster. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when geometry meets intention, the well sings back. A harmonic note, a whisper not your own, a silence so loud it becomes a presence. Modern acousticians might speak of reflections, decay time, reverb. But the mystics knew sound opens the veil. In the dark, echoing space of the well, you hear more than noise. You hear yourself as the earth hears you. Raw, unfiltered, true. Because sound is not decoration. It is key. It is path. It is invitation. The sound of the deep is not empty. It is full. It is the voice of the well, the voice of the underworld, the voice of your own soul remembering how to speak again. Not every descent was for water. Some were for transformation. Because to step into a sacred well was to step out of yourself. Initiation was never about gaining something. It was about losing, shedding, being unmade, so that something older, something true, could emerge. And the well was the perfect temple for that kind of death. Dark, enclosed, resonant, alive. The ancients understood. The earth was not only above it, was within. To walk downward was to walk into her body. To enter the spiral, the shaft, the stillness, was to re-enter the womb of creation itself. And so they carved them. Not randomly, but precisely. Wells aligned with stars, with solstices, with ley lines that hummed beneath the surface. Some of them survive. In Portugal, beneath the gardens of Quinta da Regaleira, lies the Initiation Well, a 27-meter spiral descending into the earth like a dream carved from stone. It was not built for water, it was built for ritual. Initiates walk down the spiral, candle in hand, each step a letting go of identity, of certainty, of the surface world. At the bottom, a cross, a symbol of union, a sign that the descent was over and the ascent could begin. Because no initiation ends in the dark, it ends in rebirth. In Ireland, sacred wells were linked to goddesses Brigid, Boan, guardians of water and healing. Rituals were performed not to take but to offer, to leave something behind in the well, a coin, a tear, a name, and emerge lighter. In India, stepwells were labyrinthine sanctuaries, some so elaborate they resembled inverted palaces. To walk down their steps was to leave behind the world of men and enter the realm of reflection. There, under stone beside still water, the initiate would meet silence, and in silence, the self. Because water is not just for cleansing, it is for transmutation. And the well is not a passive space, it is a witness, a container, a mirror. In every tradition, to descend into the sacred dark was to confront the shadow and to emerge radiant, not because the shadow was defeated, but because it was understood. Initiation is not a ceremony, it is a death. And the well was its cradle, a place to bury the mask, to whisper the old name, to be still enough to hear what waits beneath. Because only those who dare to go down truly rise. Not every silence is empty. Not every shadow is yours. Some depths are watched. Because in the oldest stories, descent was never unchallenged. You could not simply walk into the underworld. You had to pass through its gatekeepers. And many of those gates were wells. The ancients whispered of spirits who lived below the surface, not demons, not devils, but guardians. Sentinels of the threshold, keepers of sacred knowledge, testers of the heart. In Celtic myth, wells were watched by water goddesses, fierce and beautiful, offering healing to those who came with reverence, and madness to those who came with pride. Brigid, Boan, Danu, names that echo like water itself. In Arabic and Persian lore, deep wells and hidden springs were home to jinn beings of smoke and fire, neither good nor evil, but ancient, unpredictable, wild. To disturb their waters without offering was to invite a haunting. In Slavic tradition, it was the Vodyanoi who lived below a water spirit, sometimes seen as a dark figure with green hair and frog eyes, guarding the secrets of drowned knowledge. He was not evil, but he remembered what man had forgotten. And in almost every tradition, snakes guarded the depths, not as monsters, but as symbols of renewal, protection, and the cyclical shedding of form. The serpent did not block the path. It coiled around it to test whether you were ready to pass. Because the guardians of the well do not protect treasure, they protect truth. And truth must be earned. This is why initiates were not simply allowed to descend. They were prepared, they fasted, they dreamed, they faced their fears not metaphorically, but literally. Because beneath the surface, the soul does not lie. And the entities that dwell there, whether spirit, symbol, or subconscious archetype, will show you what you've hidden from yourself. You will hear them in the echo, see them in the reflection, feel them in the silence. Sometimes they will appear in form, a voice, a shape, a memory you've never lived, but somehow know. Other times, they are the feeling that something watches not with threat, but with ancient recognition. Because the well is not just a descent into shadow, it is a meeting with the ones who kept watch while you forgot, with the archetypes that live at the edge of death and rebirth, with the faces you wore before this one. To descend is to say, I am ready to remember. And they, the guardians, will answer, not in words, but in trials, in images, in silence that breaks you open. They do not seek your destruction, they seek your transformation. Because only the one who passes through the gaze of the deep can rise holding the flame. Not all wells are carved in stone. Some are carved in silence, some in sorrow, some in the shape of a question you've carried your whole life. There is a well that lives inside you. You feel it when you pause in the middle of the noise, when the outside world dims for a moment and something within stirs deep, dark, echoing. It is the same geometry, the same spiral, the same pull. You do not descend into it with your feet. You descend with your awareness, with your willingness to sit still, to listen without solving, to feel without fleeing. Because the journey to the sacred is not out there, it is inward. And this well, the inner one, does not ask for buckets or ropes. It asks for honesty. The kind of honesty that makes your voice shake. The kind that peels away the name you've worn and leaves only presence. The descent into the self is the oldest initiation, older than temples, older than language. It is the moment you stop climbing, stop performing, stop pretending to be the mask, and instead go down to the root of the pain, to the echo of the dream, to the memory buried beneath the forgetting. There is a moment in every seeker's life when the surface breaks, when no external path satisfies, when the sacred texts grow silent, when the teacher turns into a mirror, and in that moment, the well appears. It may come as grief, as exhaustion, as a breakdown so raw it leaves you hollow. But that hollow is not empty. It is entrance to the place where you begin again, not by learning something new, but by remembering what has always been. And there, in that depth, you will meet yourself. Not the version shaped by fear or culture, but the original one, the soul before the story. Still, vast, unshakable. That is the treasure the old wells guarded. Not gold, not secrets, but self. Truth so radiant, it had to be hidden beneath darkness so you would earn your way back to it. And now you are here. The spiral complete, the echo returned, the water still. You look into the well, and your reflection looks back. Not to test you, not to warn you, but to welcome you home.